Well, 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 Alex Paulsen to Auckland FC. They really did the funniest thing possible. About a month after I sat here in this very chair and told Wellington Phoenix fans they had nothing to worry about, a move that rules brought in 8 years ago was specifically designed to prevent has happened. Those very rules do still exist and this transfer does contradict them. Apparently, the rules are set to change, but they certainly haven't yet. So where exactly does that leave Paulsen? Adelaide United are again doubling down on their youth products, handing out just the second 5-year contract in A-League history. A bit of context to the Matildas' exit in Paris, as both of the teams that defeated them claimed medals on the final day of competition. The dates for the round of 16 in the Australia Cup are here, and Aussie links everywhere you look in the Asian Champions League draw on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast, supported by Deploy Football. My name is Lachlan Avil, and joining me today is Christian Montegan. Christian Paulsen, it was a move that we all joked about, but it's real. It's happened.
Yeah, I mean, last season, the back end of last season, even you said, Lockie, there's no way this is happening. And then all of a sudden, it's become a bit of a laughing stock, really, because when you look at all the rules and regulations where no one understood what was actually happening, because the APL and the FA have now, they're sort of discussing a way out of this mess. We'll get into that a bit later on. But yeah, it's a mess, but at the same time, it's pretty funny, you have to admit.
It is very funny. The order of events are very important, and we'll break them down for you on this episode. But hello to Chris Macpherson as well. 2 episodes in the span of a month, mate. You got to be careful. You get too familiar around here.
People might actually start to know who I am, but this is what happens. We're a bit short on talent, and the C graders get called up to the A grade. I'm not going to be bad.
Looking in for a good performance. While we're on the topic of episode stats as well, Jacob, I hope you're not feeling too nervous. You're 1 away from the half century. Not quite the nervy 90s, but must be getting a little shaky.
The good news is that unlike in real life, I'm not just going to get out by playing a stupid shot or something here. So, I'll be coming in next episode, though, full whites and everything, raise the bat for the half century. But, it's pretty crazy how quickly I've racked up this number.
Yeah, all right. Well, play it on its merits. Keep a straight bat. We'll see how we go. But the big story of the week is, of course, that Auckland FC, the Black Knights, have announced the signing of 23-24 A-League Goalkeeper of the Year, Auckland boy, and, of course, former Wellington Phoenix player Alex Paulsen. Now, as Christian has alluded to, this all happened rather quickly, and there was a lot of information going around. Here are the facts as we know them. It'll be a season-long loan from parent club AFC Bournemouth, which in itself is just completely hilarious any way you look at it. Now, the history of this rule dates back to 2016 when Anthony Caceres was purchased by Manchester City halfway through an A-League season from the Central Coast Mariners and then loaned to Melbourne City where he completed the season. Now, Australia, of course, has rules against domestic transfers. That is shouldn't be the case, but is an issue for its own day. And multi-club ownership between, obviously, Manchester and Melbourne City was viewed as a way to circumvent these domestic transfer rules. So in comes this rule colloquially known as the Caceres Clause, which prohibits these kinds of multi-club ownership loans. There's 2 parts to it. Basically, a player has to be at their new club for the expiry of 2 transfer windows, so essentially 12 months, or 6 months if that was the end of the player's contract anyway. So this rule came in after Caceres to stop this kind of, big multi-club ownerships like Manchester City using that power where other clubs don't have the ability to do so. Now, the information that the APL have released is that in May of 2024, this year, a number of clubs approached the APL to review the Caceres clause due to increased transfer market opportunities, and some version of an adaptation of this rule is supported by every club, including Wellington Phoenix. That's a key point. On the basis, though, that the APL does maintain certain but obviously reduced guardrails in terms of what is allowed to happen. So trying to balance a little bit more player development while still upholding this integrity. Here we go to Friday morning, Chris, because the APL posted an announcement detailing all of these changes at 8 a.m. and no more, I should say, than 30 minutes later at 8:30 Australian Eastern Time, Auckland announced the signing of Alex Paulsen. They pulled that all together rather quickly, didn't they?
It's amazing what you can do when you're motivated, right? I'm sure that's what I'll tell people. Definitely no one sneaking around behind the skirting boards or the rules. And look, at the end of the day, this is one of those pieces that it needs to evolve, as you touched on, Lockie, the internal transfer rules, because until it does, people are going to try and find ways to obfuscate their obligations and step around the ways they're meant to address and deal with these rules. Because, I mean, and let's use this example. What's to stop? Or what's to draw the line if Bill Foley gets there and sets up a second entity or a separate entity that owns Auckland rather than having it all under that Black Knights football group to what owns Bournemouth? Like, what is the draw? What is the the common thread there under Carrick's rule? And I don't doubt that's what teams would have been looking at if the APL didn't want to play ball with this. So, yeah, it was a very fast movement from Auckland, questionably fast. But look, if they can move the ball as fast as the pitch once they get out there, they're going to be a dangerous outfit.
They will be. And of course, this wasn't the end of it either. So at 9 a.m, half an hour after the Bournemouth announcement, the Auckland announcement, and then an hour after the APL, the Wellington Phoenix released a statement, the general manager David Dome, saying that they were seeking further information on the move. And whilst Wellington were in favour overall of this rule change, they did, state that they didn't yet know exactly what player registration and salary cap guardrails will be there. And the very crucial fact, Jacob, that FA, as the league's, not administrator, but regulator is the word, are yet to approve the change. So this has all been done before all the I's have been dotted and the T's crossed.
It's for every detail that is added to this story just makes it funnier, in my opinion. It's the fact that not only was it, this announcement was made and then the player was transferred, it's then, okay, the Phoenix come out and said, well, hang on, actually, no, they haven't approved this rule change yet. So it just keeps going. It's quite funny, although it's also a bit of an indictment on a couple of things in the processes and the way that the game's run here, because, could you imagine the absolute outcry if something like this was happening in one of the top 5 leagues over in Europe, for instance, right? You wouldn't hear the end of it from clubs. And, I think they're a little bit smarter to wait until rules are actually changed before coming out with these announcements. But the best thing about it as well is that the APL even, or the A-Leagues rather, put up posts on social media about Alex Paulsen's going to Auckland and stuff like that. And it's like, you guys surely are the first to know whether the rule is going to have changed, and it's clearly not been changed yet, and you're still posting it. Maybe it's an indication that the rule will change and it will accommodate this transfer. But then it brings into question of, can that move have been made before the rule was changed? Is that allowed under the rule? It brings up then just a whole nother group of arguments. So I don't think we've seen even close to the last of this yet, because even if the rule change does come into place, as David Dome said, we don't know what it's actually going to look like and whether this move for Paulsen from Bournemouth to Auckland would fit even under the new amended rule.
So there is a couple of ways to look at it, Christian. I've seen some people suggest that perhaps it's a way for Auckland to kind of strong arm this thing into happening because, fans know about it and there's pressure. I don't really put a lot of weight on that, to be honest with you. I think it's more of a situation where they potentially think that this FA, final tick is a bit of a rubber stamp and there's not really anything that could derail the rule change at this point. But the other part of this is the player as well, and Alex Paulsen, and is this even a good move for him? Was this part of the plan when he agreed to sign for Bournemouth? I'm sure they couldn't have predicted the rule change back then if they were only approaching the APL in May. So, how is he feeling about all this as well?
I'm just trying to think back and wonder, did Auckland maybe in the past couple of months think that this rule change was possible and he got in contact with Paulsen's agents, and did they discuss anything earlier, or has this just come to fruition, in the past few weeks or so? Because from a Paulsen perspective, you've had such a great season in the A-League last year, breakout year, phenomenal throughout, helped Wellington in that final series, agonisingly close to making a grand final, and then obviously makes that move to Bournemouth. We knew that he was never going to start, in the Premier League. It was always, the feeling was that he was always going to get loaned out to either maybe a championship club or somewhere, another club around Europe, potentially. But to come back in the A-League, you could probably view that as a step down, or a sideways step if you want at best, because surely this is the time now where Paulsen's done everything in his power to excel his career to that next level. And yeah, like I mentioned, he was never going to start at Bournemouth, but I just wonder if there were other options out there rather than, come back to the A-League for another season, because does it really improve his development? Maybe so, maybe not. We'll find out once this season commences. But I mean, for Auckland, it definitely is a bonus to have a keeper of that high quality. He just turned 22 last month. Obviously, still very raw, but he's proven that he can, show his best in the A-League. It's just a matter of, is it the right move for him? I'm not too sure.
There's a couple of interesting facets to this, and I think Jacob sort of touched on one. But the first piece, obviously, for Paulsen is he is quite young. He only really emerged in the A-Leagues, not that long ago. Like last season was his breakout season, right? So for him to then take that opportunity to go and sign a multi-year deal with a top, with a top-tier European club, which Bournemouth still has, not necessarily in the running to Premier League, champions or anything crazy like that, but it would have been an opportunity too good not to turn down. That said, as Christian and Jacob have touched on, there's going to be some questions asked if it turns out there was conversations, and we know, there's lots of conversations that managers have that they possibly shouldn't, whether that's managers of clubs or managers of players. But if it comes out that this was part of the original arrangement and was kind of the transparency, between the broader Black Knight group signing him, taking him over to Bournemouth and saying, well, we're going to give you a 4-year deal, but part of that is you're going to come back to Auckland if we can get these rules rearranged, or we believe we're going to get these rules rearranged in consultation in conjunction with other clubs. And again, Auckland aren't the only club with multi-club ownership in the A-League, which is a key point to talk about here. It's going to have some blowback, I think, and it's probably not going to start Auckland out on a great stand in their first season with the APL.
It's interesting because I agree with you, it probably damages the reputation on that side of things, but that would settle me down knowing that at least Paulsen agreed to the move, knowing that he was going to come back. Because I think if they just sprung that on him, that would be trouble, because they spoke at the announcement about having this plan in place for the next 4 years. What does his contract look like? How does he progress? And so I'd be really worried if they said, oh, no, you're going to sit on the bench and you're going to learn, in Bournemouth, and all of a sudden you're being shipped back to the A-League. I think that would be the more concerning thing for me, but I agree with you. And
I think club is a positive. Club league is a massive negative, and it probably adds some real murkiness to the future of multi-club from an Australian football fans' point of view.
Yeah, and you are right as well to point out that multiple clubs are involved in multi-ownership in Australia, and as well, part of that APL release, Jacob, was that all of the clubs were in favour of adapting this rule in some way. So it's not just Auckland pushing for this. Everyone, at least the clubs, wants it as well.
Well, and I think it makes sense from every single club in terms of we're entering this period of financial struggle, right? And you need to get creative with, what you can do, who you can sign, how you can try and offload a bit of the wages here and there to keep the ship afloat. I mean, we've just seen Adelaide United sign a player who's not going to play a minute for them because he's on loan already to another Dutch club. So, it's teams are looking at ways to generate income, but also avoid having to, bear the brunt of the costs of things like player wages and stuff like that, especially during these development periods. So, I think it kind of makes sense from that perspective that, that clubs want a bit more, potentially even just clarity on this rule, right? And just really shoring it up and making sure that it fits with the current financial situation. But I think that it wouldn't be, particularly shocking for me to say that multi-club ownership is sort of still a bit taboo in football worldwide. I think there are a lot of people strongly against it, myself probably one of them. I hate the idea of monopolizing a sport. It's obviously it hasn't gotten to that level, but you look at the Red Bull teams, for instance, and the City teams and things like that. And it's now Bill Foley, he's got stakes in about half a dozen different teams around the world as well. So it's getting to the point now where the upper echelons of football in particular are starting to be controlled by the same people with the same money, and that's where it becomes problematic. And that's why I think it's still important to have a rule like this to restrict the influence that these massive consortiums can have over player movement, who goes where and that sort of stuff. But I think it also does need to be reviewed given the financial situation that the league and the clubs are in.
I think we have to give Wellington some credit as well, because I think they've handled the situation with class. I mean, at the same time, they should rightly be a bit disappointed, because you think about it, right? If they knew about if this rule could potentially come in, which they didn't really know to begin with, right? They agreed to it, but they didn't know that it was a possibility. Like you were saying last season, Lockie, you were saying there was no way of this happening. Could there have been a situation where Wellington could have organised a loan back to the Phoenix after the sale to Bournemouth? So I think from that perspective, they can feel a bit hard done by there. But they wished Alex Paulsen all the best for his career moving forward. But rightly so, they've just questioned the process, I guess, and how has this all come about? There's still a few questions to be answered, that's for sure.
Yeah, and Jacob, I think you stumbled on a really good example of what Chris was talking about earlier when we consider the Adelaide United and PSV example. Well, they're not a multi-club ownership as well. So would they fall under this Caceres clause of being able to loan players from PSV? They're in this partnership with them. There's clearly being preferential treatment in there somewhere with this loan deal. And, we're about to talk about a bunch of academy players who have just come back from PSV to do a training camp with their academy. There is links there, but they're not owned by the same people. So how do they fall within the rule set? So the water gets very murky for sure.
I think the thing to realise is clubs are always going to find ways to skirt on the edges. Like look at the whole Scott Cassidy, situation at Man City as a City fan. Clubs find ways around these things. That means they've got to either bolster. So you do need to build some restrictions around it. I don't know if there's a way to equate a wage and create a market value that these things accrue to limit it, but I don't know where they're going to stop it. And multi-club ownership is, I think, unfortunately, for the sanctity of us all, the sanctity of football, going to become a more prevalent, not a less prevalent factor as we move forward.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, let's head to Adelaide United because they have made a number of contract extensions over the last few days. The first three that we're going to talk about is a trio of academy graduates. We have Faizo Kasumovic, Malual Nicola, and Amlani Tatu as well, all on 3-year deals. Tatu specifically was the player of the tournament at the recent Under-15 National Youth Championships. All three of them have been selected for the Australia Under-17s as well. As I mentioned, Jacob, they've just come back from PSV for that training camp with their academy. If they weren't already, Adelaide United definitely doubling down on that youth angle.
Yeah, I was going to say, is anybody surprised by this? Adelaide United signing some of their youth players. This is pretty much what we've come to expect from the club. Over the last decade or so, it's been the same in that the top 4 or 5 of the best youth players get the chance to sign a scholarship deal or a senior contract with the club and see how they go there. But Amlani Tatu, you spoke about, was player of the tournament at that youth competition, and he is arguably got the biggest expectations on him of the three, just because of the what we've seen from him so far is insane. I mean, some of the goals that he scores, I don't want to put the pressure on him, but it's very reminiscent of a certain player that left Adelaide United last season. And look, they're different profiles though, right? Like Aaron Kunda, much more explosive on the ball, right? He's a bit more streaky in that sense. Tatu is just such a well-rounded player. His movement is so fluid. They're both very similar build. They look very similar on the ball when they're dribbling with it and stuff, but where Aaron Kunda was really explosive and it was that 1 or 2 moments a game that he, would really look to score a goal. Tatu is just involved consistently and he looks really, really good on the ball, really fluid, constantly involved. So, it'd be exciting to see how he goes. And with there sort of being a question over who's going to play on the wings this season for Adelaide United, I know that Austin Iubi has looked fantastic in pre-season so far. He's probably the first name on the team sheet there, but the other side of the pitch, it's a little bit more up in the air. There's a chance for him to get some really good minutes this season and nail himself in for a starting spot heading forwards into the future. And the other two, as you mentioned, already Australia under 17 reps. Ernest Faber has spoken highly about them as well, because when they were on that trip to the Netherlands, he was still with PSV. So he got to see them firsthand. They were involved in training sessions. I think they were involved in a match as well there. It's really good to see clubs starting to reward these youth players. I'll say starting to. Adelaide have been doing it for a long time. It's on really the others now to start to do the same thing. But for where there's been, I think, a lack of investment in, outside players coming to the club, Adelaide have done a really good job so far in retaining the talent that they do have, so that it doesn't just slip away from them and they have to completely rebuild from scratch.
Well, it does seem like those Adelaide United boys will be wearing the same jersey for a little while. But Chris, if they wanted to switch it up just every once in a while with some custom kits, you know where they should go? I think you're bang on the money. I think Deploy Football, of course. No lock-in contract, of course, for teamwear, featuring custom sublimated kits in a 15-day turnaround. That'll go pretty well for 5 years. You could get a lot of value out of that. You're definitely going to lose a couple of balls as well over that time, Christian. So I think if you wanted to stock up, you should go with one of only 2 Australian brands ever to receive a FIFA Quality Pro license for their footballs, used in international fixtures all over the world. Why would you go anywhere else?
You can't go wrong, Lockie.
Absolutely. Thank you to Deploy for sponsoring this episode of the show. But we'll get back to Adelaide United. And of course, there is another big signing there as well. And Chris, it is Ethan Alagich on just the second 5-year deal in the league's history, and only a couple of weeks after the first was given to his teammate Panakikianis. They're not making the same mistake that they did with Nestor. They're getting these young players on cheap turns before they've broken out into the first team in a major way, securing them on long-term deals to make sure both the players are tied down for the A-League, but also if knockers do come and look for an overseas transfer, that they have a lot of power when it comes to the negotiating table as well.
100%. I think this is a sign of things to come for the A-Leagues in total. Adelaide are making some really smart moves here. It's not to stop these players by any means. I don't think any of these clubs will get in the way of these players going on to bigger and brighter opportunities. And we've seen that in recent times, a number of players signing European deals in the off-season. We've seen clubs start to sign players that might be a little bit older than Alagich to, we saw Newcastle with a couple of players with Taylor and Stamatopoulos signing to a little bit longer deals just to give themselves a bit of security in terms of that the outbound transfer market. And Newcastle's, a great success with that. With Costa loss, they've done well there. Obviously, Taylor's hung around, but we'll see this more and more, especially, I think, with these, what you might call smaller market clubs that are really focusing on youth development. Adelaide and Central Coast leading that charge, and Newcastle's trying to play catch up there as well. But they've got to find ways that equal their balance sheet so they can then go into the market for bigger names later on. This is the way to do it. One, it gives some security to the young players too, so that if you do have those challenges of injuries or maybe a bit of normalisation reform, then you've got some upside. But two, it's the clubs protecting their longer-term interest and, as you said, putting themselves in a really good negotiating position to make sure they get the maximum come transfer time when, the next generation of Australian talent looks to go abroad.
And even, Christian, in the short term, you're looking at a league which over the next 2 years at least will be fought with a lot of young players. You're also just signing some of the league's best young players to play in your team for the next few years.
Yeah, definitely. But I think the problem, just using Adelaide as an example, it's great to invest in youth. Like we're all for that. Especially economically, we're going to see those massive advantages, take its stride in the next 2-3 years, whatever it may be. And Adelaide can hopefully they can take advantage of that. But at the same time, currently, you just wonder with them, where's their project and where are they heading? Because yes, you can develop all the great youngsters you want and develop as many as you want, but at the same time, you need to, I guess, pinpoint, certain players to build, a championship winning team, a finals built team, whatever the case may be. And yes, focusing on youth is one thing, but I don't want to say it as a bad way, but you don't want to be focusing on that, putting all your eggs in one basket in that sense. You've got to go out and try and be ambitious, try and, get a good marquee, because Adelaide have been sort of lacking in that department now for a little while. Yes, it's great that they got some money for Iran Kunda. That was a great deal there, but it's just, I don't know about Jacob, but there's no real identity there. I don't know how to explain it. There's no real sort of planning or a real project to say, okay, this is our ambition for the next 2-3 years.
I do agree with you there, Christian, in that this, in isolation, this is a fantastic move, but it's you're signing on a midfielder in an absolutely stacked midfield. I think Adelaide have something like 9 central midfielders. Off the top of my head, some of the names: Johnny Yull, obviously Ethan Alagich, Isaias still has another year on his contract, Zach Clough, Stefan Moork, Luke Druzel, Ryan Tunnicliffe. Like, how do you fit them all into a team? You've got, these 8 or 9 players that, could start for most clubs, and you've got to try and make something of it all. And then you've not got enough players in other positions on the pitch and things like that. And you're right, it does feel like it's sort of the club has lost momentum in terms of building a team that's going to push for finals, and they're sort of starting a rebuild now, right? They missed the chance at winning anything for 3 years in a row, right? They made the semi-final 3 years in a row, couldn't get over that final hurdle, and it's almost sort of felt like last season was, right, we're just going to see what we can do with sort of a team where we've lost a couple of key players. Obviously, had lost Craig Goodwin. It's now a case of, right, we've now lost Goodwin, we've lost Iran Kunda, lost Ibasuki, need to rebuild the whole club because you've got no defenders. Like, you know, it does feel like it's the start of a rebuild. And I think you saying, who are they going to build around? I think giving a 5-year contract to Ethan Alagich sort of suggests that this is the sort of player that they're going to look to build around. And that makes sense because as a player, he's absolutely tremendous. I was speaking just before about, you know, how do you build a cohesive midfield unit from all of the players that Adelaide have? And it looked a bit shambolic for most of the season until he was brought into the side. He's this real proper old school box-to-box midfielder, just absolutely loves to go in hard in challenges, wins the ball back consistently. He's good on the ball, picks a pass out beautifully. He's just got this energy about him. He's like a terrier on the pitch, right? He's just running around everywhere. So much energy. It's fantastic to watch. And when you've got somebody like Isaias who can sit a little bit deeper, play as that 6, to have Alagich sort of pivoting around that is really, really helpful. And in the back end of the season, I think the midfield for Adelaide United was probably one of its strongest units. And that's in no small part thanks to the fact that Alagich started to get starting minutes for the club. So, you know, I think that Viet and the management staff and the footballing staff at Adelaide United have sort of identified that Alagich is the sort of player that could, you know, change a team going forwards, and he's the sort of player you can build around because he opens up so many avenues. You can play so many different types of football with a really good number 8, and that's what you got with Alagich. So, you know, I think that giving the 5-year contract, yes, it's giving them leverage come transfer time if that eventuates, but it's also securing in potentially one of the key pieces moving into the future that they can build around. And I think we're just now starting to see the start of that rebuild process. I think it's going to take a couple of years. They're playing catch up to the likes of the Mariners. Victory have built a really good squad. You know, there are a couple of teams that are a fair few steps ahead of them, but you've got to start somewhere. And I think that this is at least the starting point, and they've gone, right, we've got to do something. We're going to sign this kid on because he's fantastic. We can see a future for him at the club, and we'll go from there.
Chris, do you think the start of this season will be a trial by fire for a couple of these clubs? Because it's not just Adelaide United that have gone really heavy on youth. Obviously, a lot of teams are doing it. And it is a symptom of the off-season where the binoculars tend to zoom out a little bit, and you're thinking, okay, longer term, big picture, this is good. Financially, these deals make sense. But when the season creeps up on you, it's the 90 minutes that matter, and fans lose sight of the long term a little bit, and it becomes about the short term in this season. And if you start losing and you don't have the older heads like we saw with Adelaide United last season to kind of manage that, you know, almost shock and surprise of losing a few games in a row, then things can deteriorate quite quickly.
I think 100% that's right. Fans are very happy to find the silver linings in any news story right now because we're desperate for football action to be back on our doorstep. But once results start chalking up against those, that's when the proof's in the pudding. And it's interesting. I was sort of contemplating that when Jacob was talking through that piece, and it's very much about clubs trying to find an identity, but it's not like in England where you can be a 15th or 16th place side as long as you avoid relegation. And if that's what the expectation for your club is year in, year out, and you're making some good transfers, you're bringing in some names, you're winning some games, maybe move up to 10th or 12th and slide back, then fans are okay. Fans here expect, as Jacob alluded to, that at some point in a cycle, you're going to be a contender for a premiership, whether you're Newcastle, whether you're Adelaide, or whether you're Sydney FC. That cycle might be a little bit shorter in expectation if you're Sydney FC or Melbourne Victory than it is maybe for some of the smaller market teams. But again, it's that piece of what are we building towards? At what point? We can't continually be in a rebuild. That said, it's an interesting piece if they do go chips in on a couple of these young midfielders or a couple of young players with 5-year contracts, and then in a year or 2 years, clubs come knocking on the door just as they're getting to that point again, and the numbers are too good to refuse. But then the question is going to be asked, as it is or was with Iran Kunda, where's that money now being spent in terms of our next tilt? Because you can't just, double and sell out the farm up and start the farm again. So what's the question going to be? Because I don't think there's any clubs fans in our competition they're going to settle for being a development club forever and ever.
And I think as well, this is where sort of that communication stream between, the footballing arm, the management arm of the team, and the fans as well is so important. And it's not something that, at least from an Adelaide perspective, we haven't had a huge amount of, right? I know at the start of last season they came out with this new slogan of being the people's club, and there's going to be transparency and things. And for the first few rounds there was, because things were going great. Top of the table, we just beat Melbourne City 6-0, you know, heading off to a tough match, a victory in the original rivalry. Things are great. The Irankunda move is announced, so everybody's riding a high on that. Then things start to go wrong and it's radio silence from the club. And, you know, it sort of almost has been until now. When Ernest Faber came in, there was a little bit around that and how, you know, the club wants to be the biggest and best club in Australia. And it's like, well, that's great to say, but now you've set the expectation for fans. How are you going to reach that? And that's what I don't think any club really is putting out there, is how they're going to achieve these things. I know that Perth Glory did, when Ross Pelligra came in, they sort of had this sort of 3-point plan that they brought in and said, these are the 3 core things that we're going to look to do over the next few years to bring fans back and bring football, you know, fever back to the West, which I kind of like, but still it's not those specifics. It's not, we're looking to compete, or we're in this stage of a rebuild, you know, be patient, you know, results aren't going to be coming our way anytime soon, sort of thing. It's sort of like they're doing all of these moves and you can try and piece together something from it, but until you get that direct communication, you know, as fans, you're completely lost on it. And I think that's, Chris, where you're absolutely spot on, is that in other leagues, it's quite clear where teams sit because there's more teams in a league, you know, expectations are different because of things like promotion and relegation. Whereas here it's, you've got the finals and that's it. You know, and because it's half the league that gets into finals, fans do expect that. And then when you've got your clubs coming out and saying that we want to be the best in the country, that's setting those expectations even higher. So I think that just across the league as a whole, there just needs to be more communication from clubs to fans, because, you know, you're leaving out that key part that, you know, the fans are the ones who are turning up every single week. They're the ones who are, you know, introducing those revenue streams from merchandise sales, from ticket sales, things like that. So, you know, they're a really important stakeholder in the game. And I think sort of leaving them out to dry is sort of the wrong move, especially when you're putting these expectations so high.
I think you've nailed that pretty well in terms of transparency is a key, but there's a counter to that in the communication. We need to have honest communication, but fans need to accept honest communication and while keeping them accountable to it. Not losing our mind if our team comes out at the start of the season and says, look, this season is going to be a challenging year, but here's our 4-year plan. At the end of the day, though, if we go down the NRL route of some of the teams that have had 15-year, 5-year plans, well, then by all means start calling for heads to roll. But it's a two-way street in terms of honest communication. It needs to be received in the right way, and I don't know that a lot of fans are ready for that at the moment. I think there's a lot of fans that if they're told, even though in their heart of hearts, they know that, you know, their teams, you know, not necessarily contending for a premiership. And I know that sometimes surprise runs happen, all those sorts of wonderful fairy tale stories, but they generally are fairy tales and they're very few and far between. So I'm a Newcastle Jets fan. I'm not expecting our team to be going out and winning 5-0 every week and, you know, running an undefeated run of the league this season. I'd love to hear from, you know, the club on a regular basis as to where is our goalpost for the end of the season. And that can move, that can adjust with things that happen. You lose a couple of key players, key injuries. Okay, well, we readdress that. And to be fair, even with everything that went on last year, Robbie Stan was actually one of the best in the league at that, in terms of he was pretty open with media, he was pretty open with fans. Sometimes not necessarily in public forums because there's limitations on that because of other expectations. But I think the league as a whole will be a lot better, but fans need to be ready for it, need to receive it in the way that we deliver.
Christian?
I was just going to say, for clubs, not just Adelaide's perspective, but all clubs, I think a bit of leeway has to be given, because we've seen, you know, a couple of transfer fees come in. Irankunda went for over $5 million, I think. You know, the Paulsen deal, that was a large sum as well. So I think, you know, in the foreseeable future, you start to see these transfers come through for the young players going abroad and getting that good transfer fee. But it's how these clubs use the money in the next 2-3 years, for example. Are they going to invest it more in youth? Are they going to be more ambitious, like I was saying to Jacob, for Adelaide perspective? Are they going to try and build, you know, a solid base and a solid foundation to win championships? Or are they just going to keep relying on youth and go through the same development cycle phase? So I think we still need a bit more time to judge, you know, once that all comes to fruition, because again, all of the financial problems, we stated that with the APL. So the clubs are already, you know, on the back foot. So I think it will take a bit of time to judge.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be interesting to see what happens at the start of the season. But before we get there, we have the Australia Cup to deal with, and Football Australia have confirmed the schedule for the round of 16. We knew the matchups, but now we have the dates as well. Going to get some Sunday football, Chris, which I believe you'll be participating in. The Jets and the Bulls at 3 p.m. on the Sunday, followed by South and Olympic a little bit later on. It's good to, well, we saw the City Perth game put on a bit of a spectacle on the Saturday night. So the more weekend football we can get, the better, I reckon.
Yeah, I agree. I don't want to oversell to our listeners. My participation will purely be limited behind a microphone. No one wants to see me play any form of football. That would be some diabolical story. Jets sign a 37-year-old man who's barely played any football in the last 15 years. Looking forward to that. I think there's some consternation up this way, though, in terms of it's going to clash with the Northern New South Wales NPL finals on that same day. And so a lot of fans that really were pushing for the Saturday night. That'll be the first week of semi-finals for the Northern New South Wales NPL. So games will be played Saturday and Sunday during the afternoon to early evening. But at the end of the day, I think it's a challenge either way. It's good just to be seeing top tier football, not to denigrate from the NPL, but that next tier being played on a Sunday and getting some action on a weekend, because I think the powers that be are damned if they do, damned if they don't. No matter when they put it, if they put it on Saturday night, it's at the wrong location. I've already seen that, it's too far to travel. I think there's one of the Queensland games, a few people said there was at Perry Park and not at the Redcliffe larger stadium. And at the end of the day, we know that football fans are, if nothing else, good at finding reason to pick faults, and it's not an easy job being a governing body. But I'm just excited that we're starting to see, this competition heating up. It's through to the round of 16. We're guaranteed an NPL club in the semi-finals, or a lower tier club, I should say, in the semi-finals. So it's an exciting draw. I like the way it's shaped up, and kicking this round off with some Sunday football, both all A-League clash and an NPL clash is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And that NPL clash as well, South Melbourne, of course, Victoria, and then Olympic up in Queensland. Both NPLs end this weekend. Olympic can't make their final series, but South have locked up a top 2 spot, so they get to skip the first week of finals in Victoria. That's how their system works with the top 6. So instead of having a week off, they're going to play an Australia Cup tie, which I'm sure they'd actually prefer, because it will be now centrally in the middle of their 2 other fixtures either side of it. So they get a game on a Sunday. I'm sure there'll be some NPL finals probably on the Saturday, so that'll work out quite nicely in Victoria. And then the other 6 split across Tuesday and Wednesday the following week, Jacob. So another fun week of Australia Cup action before we get into the thick of the A-League.
That's right. And where the A-League clash might sort of be good to see where these 2 clubs are in terms of their pre-season prep and how they look moving into the season. It'll be interesting to see the South and Olympic game in terms of how do the 2 states fare against each other. Okay, South's a lot higher up the table than Olympic are, but it's still a case of, it's that old who's got the best division in football sort of thing, right? Which state is it? I know that on the last podcast episode, it was you guys were firmly in the camp of NPL Victoria, and I don't think I can make much of a case for SA given the performances that they had. But it's just another one where it's it's a state against state. It's not within the same one. It's not they've played each other 3 times this season sort of thing. It's going to be interesting because they haven't played each other this season. They might not know really what to expect, and it's going to be a good judge of the 2 levels of the NPL competitions there, because we don't have that NPL finals series anymore across the whole of the country. So the Australia Cup really is the only way to sort of judge how the development of each league is going. So that'll make it really interesting for sure.
Center of the universe, mate.
Football fans, what's going to happen here. If South Melbourne win Olympic and the NPL Queensland, people say, but Olympic won our best side. They finished 6th or 7th. And if South Melbourne lose, then led by 2 people on this call, it will be, they'll probably focus on NPL finals. That means more to them this year, blah, blah, blah.
They're accurate.
We're great at finding excuses. And I don't know if I can invite it back. I've found about 5 different ways to pop football fans in general tonight. Absolutely just firing strategies.
To be fair, I put it on the record last week, and I'm going to stick with this. I actually think South could be the one team that would legitimately prioritise an Australia Cup run more than an NPL final series. I think they're really chasing that history. I think it could be fascinating. Christian, we're going to go back to the Olympic Games one more time because Emma Hayes' USA have won gold at the Olympic Women's Football Tournament. Germany, of course, picking up bronze in the 3v4 playoff. And the question I do want to ask about all this is not really about those teams specifically, but does this now contextualize the Matildas' results a little bit? Do they get a little more room for error, a little more breathing room, because the two teams that they did lose to did go on to claim medals at the Olympic Games?
I mean, I'd say no, because when you come into the tournament that USA were being coached by Emma Hayes, arguably the best coach in the women's game, they were always going to improve. The results beforehand, showed that their performances did pick up. There were going to be no easy beats. And then Germany as well, despite, yes, last World Cup, they had a shocker, didn't make it out of the group. But since then, the results have still been pretty positive, and they've picked off from last year and definitely improved. So we knew we were going to face two absolute quality opposition, but the outlier was Zambia. And that game in particular, you shipped in 5 goals against Zambia, like ranked 40-something in the world, I think, from memory. And there's no excuse. It was the way we performed throughout the whole tournament. It was our own doing from Matilda's perspective, where the wrong decisions were made by Gustafsson. The players just didn't live up to the expectation throughout the whole group stage. There were little patches and good bright spots, like Katrina Gorry in that first game against Germany. She played really well, but it was really hard to find a player who performed really consistently throughout. It was really difficult to pick out. So yes, Germany, USA both won a medal, but at the same time, you could argue that they were one of the favourites to do so. And the Matildas, we were previewing it before the Olympic campaign, how the Matildas had that easier side of the bracket, being in Group B, where they had that bit of a luxury, where if they did progress out of their group, that they had a big opportunity to do something and claim a medal. So I'd say no, to be honest.
Jacob, you giving anything, or Chris?
I was gonna say, let's just take a different spin on this. Let's switch an eye very quickly to the men's football tournament at the Olympics. Argentina, a highly touted side. Do we think the fact that they lost to Morocco, who ended up winning a medal in France, on their way through with their 2 losses, which saw them eliminated in the quarterfinals, would be accepted well by Argentina? Because that's exactly what's happened. Although they've actually made it to the quarterfinals and haven't had a crack. So I think they'll be getting absolutely berated as one of the top tier footballing nations in a side that had expectation heading in again to this tournament. It's not that different. I think we've got a very one green, one goal right here, trying to find a soft landing for the Matildas and trying to find reasons and excuses of, Sam Kerr didn't play, they went and won medals. We underperformed the bar that we set.
Yeah, look, I agree with you that we underperformed, but I don't think that comparison is quite fair, because the Germany and USA are both in the top 6 in the world. Like, they're very good football teams.
Well, they are very good football teams, but so are the sides that won medals in the men's competition, and Argentina lost to both of them. So to Christian's point, we performed pretty average against Zambia for large portions of the game. We're lucky to get away with a win in one of the most bizarre games of football known to the human race. I'm still fortunate. I still count myself fortunate we got to see that, because it was bizarre, it was phenomenal, and there's lots of storylines that come out of that you want to talk about. But again, I still think that it's a measuring stick. We knew who the pool was. We knew that if we could get through to qualify, that we set ourselves up on the right side. We didn't get to where we needed to get to. We underperformed. We can try and pull it apart and look at the excuses and the reasons, but was it the worst performance of all time? No. Was it on the expectation of what we expect from the Matildas and where they perform? Because again, we believe, or we view them as probably a little bit higher in their ranking years and maybe a top 10 nation. Well, no, they didn't. And so it's back to the drawing board. Tony's paid the price. And I think it's time for a bit of a reset and a refresh, and maybe some of that honest communication we're talking about around what their expectations are for the next few big tournaments.
All right. A resounding no. I just wanted to pose the question. It's been resolutely answered. Let's finish off with some positive Tillies news then, because Jacob, 1 year to the day as we sit here on Thursday night since Courtney Vine was the hero against France in that quarterfinal penalty shootout. It's worth reminiscing on, because what an amazing game it was. I remember sitting on my couch with my family watching the game. Genuinely the most unbearable game of football I've ever watched, sitting through that penalty shootout. So many twists and turns. I was hiding behind the couch. I didn't know what to do with myself. But the magic moment, Courtney Vine, it's just magical.
I can't say I was feeling the same, but perhaps that was my Englishness coming out there. But I think just in general, the moment is pretty awesome to be able to look back on and reminisce upon, because what that's done now to bring women's football to where it is, it wasn't all just that one moment or just the one tournament, right? It's been steady growth over years and years and years, but that's sort of been that sort of capstone to it, right? Where it's all led up to this moment, and to have a moment like that in a home World Cup is pretty special. And, you know, yeah, even though I am English, I do look back on that and I think that's a pretty cool moment. And just what that's done to
that's saying something.
Women's football is huge. Yeah. well, I mean, it does help that we won in that semi-final. So.
Oh no! I didn't realize I'd opened that door up for him.
No, there we go. But no, it was a fact that penalty shootout was pretty awesome, and there was just so much good football on display in that tournament as a whole as well, from pretty much every side that took part. And you know, the fact that we've now got the Women's Asian Cup coming along in a couple of years as well on home soil. It's going to be another opportunity for similar sort of stuff. And yeah, I just really hope that, I think I've said this 3 or 4 times on different episodes, that we continue to see this growth, that the Olympics, this sort of underperformance isn't a setback in women's football, and that it's sort of right. It can't always be, you know, rosy. There's going to be tough times. It's about how you push through that and how you continue to bring that momentum forwards from that World Cup into the Asian Cup, because I think this is a huge opportunity for women's football here in this country, and it would be silly for it to go to waste because of, you know, stuff like you know, fans bickering over was it an underperformance or was it not an underperformance. You know, it's a shame on the podcasts that give those opinions a platform.
Yeah, fancy. Well, it used to being a blip on the radar of underperformance. And look, if it does become broader, Jacob, then we'll certainly lean on the English to learn how to deal with underperformance at major tournaments.
Yeah, touche.
Shots fired.
Well played. All right. Well, we'll finish off by talking a little bit of Asian football, because the final qualifying games for the Asian Champions League are being played during this week. This sets up the draw that will happen on Friday. We're going to find out who the Central Coast Mariners will play in the league phase, of course, of the Champions League Elite. Now, remember, out of the 12 teams that are in the league phase on the east side, the Mariners will have 8 opponents, so 8 out of a possible 11 teams, for a pretty good chance to get some link-ups with some Aussie connections everywhere in this draw. Of course, we have Yokohama F. Marinos, who are now managed by John Hutchinson, taking over from Harry Kuehl. Shanghai Port under the stewardage of Kevin Muscat, who are going absolutely gangbusters in the Chinese Super League at the moment. They are 18 games in a row, in a winning streak, 18 games in a row, undefeated in 25 in all competitions. Absolutely incredible. They're 5 points clear at the top of the CSL. You've got Pohang Steelers from South Korea with Jonathan Aspropotomides. Guangzhou, also from South Korea, with Alexander Popovich. Those two not seeing a whole lot of game time, but perhaps the league phase of the Champions League is where they get some of those rotation minutes. And then Buriram as well from Thailand, no longer coached by Arthur Papas, but have Kenny Dougal in their midfield. So plenty of Aussies in that. I'm sure we'll see at least a few of them on Australian soil to play against the Mariners. And then Christian Sydney FC will get their draw as well for the Champions League 2. A small refresher on this one, it's essentially the same format as what the Champions League proper was last season. The only change is that we dropped down from 40 teams to 32. So instead of this weird group situation where City don't lose but go out in second, it's just straight in, 4 in, 2 out, which simplifies things a lot. But I think the biggest Australian connection in the Champions League 2 really will be Sanfrecce Hiroshima, the Japanese team, of course, where Tolgay Arslan is currently playing his trade.
Yeah, that'd be quite a story, wouldn't it, if it got matched up with Sydney FC. But, I mean, yeah, it's definitely more simplistic now, cutting down those 8 teams down to 32. I think it makes more sense, to be honest. A bit all over the place last season, at least. That's padded down now. But, yeah, imagine Tolgay Arslan scoring the winner against Sydney FC. That'd be quite something, wouldn't it?
It would. Jacob, do you guys?
I was just going to say that on Alexander Popovich, you mentioned that he hasn't seen a whole lot of minutes in South Korea, and there seems to be rumours around on social media that he might have an injury of some sort, because of the fact that he came into the team and was starting, and then all of a sudden just wasn't playing at all. And there's been nothing from the club in terms of it, but we know that a lot of clubs don't always outright say who's injured and who's not injured and things like that. But there does seem to be a rumour persisting that he might be sort of nursing an injury at the moment, which is why he's not seen many minutes. But, still, this would be a good opportunity for him to sort of get into that rehabilitation phase and to get some minutes in the legs in, non-league competition, which, as we know, is always a rotation option for clubs. They're always looking to bring in players who aren't necessarily in the starting 11 into these games. So it could be a chance for him to sort of come back into the team a bit there and reclaim his starting spot.
Yeah, interesting rumour. I can tell you from experience, you might find this strange, but playing a little bit of fantasy football with players from Japan and Korea, it is notoriously hard to find player information there, not just because of the language barrier, but because clubs tend to hide a little bit more and the information is just harder to get, which is interesting in itself. But is there any teams in that list, Chris, that jump out to you that you wouldn't mind seeing playing Australia?
I'd love to see Central Coast draw Yokohama, just so that everyone at Gosford, if Yokohama come and steal points, can realise that John Hutchinson is a villain that we all saw him as for 200 plus games in the A-League. I say that as a Jets fan and firmly with tongue in cheek, but I think that'd be a cool little story, obviously, with Hutcho having been at the Mariners for so long and such a crucial part of their development in the early years of the A-League. There'd be a nice little story if he came back there and coached Yokohama in front of the Gosford crowd. And I'm sure that'd actually make him very welcome because he was a legend of their club. And again, it's easy to forget that he played 200 plus A-League games, so I like that little tie-in if we can get it at the draw.
Yeah, I would personally love to see Kevin Muscat back on Australian soil as well. He's got a trio of assistants as well, all Aussies. Of course, we talked about Ross Aloisi plenty, but there's a few more as well. So to get them back in Australia would be pretty cool as well, I think, in such a prestigious competition, and it's getting a shake-up. And we're not too far away from kickoff as well. The 17th of September is the first Asian Champions League match day. So that's in between the quarterfinals and semi-finals of the Australia Cup. So only about a month away till we get that premium continental football. But that will do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Thanks again very much to Deploy Football for supporting this episode of the show and our coverage of the beautiful game. Christian Montegan, thank you.
Always a pleasure.
Chris Macpherson, good to see you again.
Good to be back.
And Jacob Stevens.
Thank you, Lockie. Just need that one more for my half century. Just
one more.
Play it safe. Don't do anything silly. Like you said, straight back.
You won't come up with
single.
Yeah.
No bad ball.
His router's going to drop out right before the next recording. He's going to sit at 49 for a little while. Thank you all very much to everyone listening at home. We appreciate your company very much. We will be back on Friday. Thank you again. Goodbye.